Hey guys, what is going on? MadSpace here, and I have another Metroid Dread video for you all today. Not too long ago, I put out a video where I was facing off against all of the bosses in one of my playthroughs, so if you want to check that out, go ahead and check out the link in the description or in the comments. But today, I'm going to rank those bosses from easiest to hardest. Now, if you've done multiple playthroughs of Metroid Dread, you'll probably get used to the patterns of each boss and stuff like that, so at some point they actually won't seem that difficult. So this is pretty much out of a perspective of someone's first playthrough. I've done multiple playthroughs, so all of the bosses are actually not that difficult for me now, but I'm just trying to think back to my first playthrough and then ranking them that way. So without further ado, let's get started. Number 11, I'm going to go with Golzuna. I think he, in my opinion, is the easiest boss in Metroid Dread. He doesn't really challenge you in any meaningful way. I mean, he is invulnerable to your attacks when he's facing towards you, but if you wait for the right time, you can either shoot missiles at him or charge your wave beam, and you can just slide under him as well. He does have an attack that resembles a cross bomb that you receive when you beat him, and you can just use your gravity jump to jump right over him to the other side and avoid them completely. This fight is way too easy because you fight him really late in the game when you have pretty much all of your most important upgrades already. It kind of makes him a pushover, unfortunately. He resembles a boss that you would probably face off in the beginning of a game when you have little to no resources, but for some reason they stick him in the end. I understand that they probably wanted to put a boss that gives you a new power-up, which again, like I said, it gives us the cross bomb. Unfortunately, that just means that Golzuna is a little bit too easy, so I'm ranking him as the easiest boss. Number 10, I'm gonna go with the EMMIs and the central units. At first, I wasn't sure if I wanted to add the EMMIs into this countdown since they're mostly like an enemy interaction rather than a boss, but I decided to add them when I realized that they're arguably more difficult to deal with than Golzuna, especially on a first playthrough, although not by much. When encountering them in the EMMI zone, you have no means of damaging them, so your only option is to run, which isn't that difficult to do if you have experience moving around in Metroid games. Each of the EMMIs have different characteristics that you have to deal with. For example, the EMMI in Ferenia can shoot through walls and gives you the wave beam, and the EMMI in Gavaran can freeze you and gives you the ice missiles when defeated. If you get caught, you do have the chance to counter their attacks and not die, but the timing is actually really tough. That's really the only thing remotely difficult about dealing with the EMMIs in my opinion, because otherwise you can just avoid them by good platforming. Once you finally reach the central unit, it kind of just floats there and lets you hit it. It actually gives me Mother Brain vibes because you're just laying missile after missile into a brain while avoiding lasers and red donuts flying towards you. Obviously, this fight is significantly easier, and once you do beat the central unit, you get the Omega Cannon, which basically one-shots the EMMI after you overheat its protective armor with the Omega Stream. After you deal with the first two EMMIs in the game, you come to a clear understanding of how to deal with them, so even on a first playthrough, they're really not that difficult to deal with. Moving on to number 9, I'm going to go with SQ. SQ is another boss that you see a little bit too late in the game for how simple he is to fight, but the pacing is a little bit better because you have enough upgrades to counter him, but not too many to be overpowered like against Golzuna. The only thing that's mildly inconvenient about SQ is that he does have an electric shield or aura that makes him invulnerable until he dives towards you, and that goes away for a short time where then you can hit him. You can make this fight easier by sequence breaking and getting the screw attack, as the screw attack I believe can damage through the electric shield. But even if you don't do that, you can literally dodge all of his attacks just by jumping, so he's not that challenging at all. Number 8 is Droigiga. Now I'm not sure how to pronounce this name, so I'm just going to stick with that. Droigiga is an underwater squid type boss that you fight in Berenia. The hardest part about this fight is that you're fighting underwater without the gravity suit or even your double jump. His attacks really aren't that difficult to deal with. He shoots fire underwater somehow, and you can take those out with your power beam or missiles to destroy them, and all the while you're hitting the tentacle on his head with everything you got. Once you do enough damage, the tentacle kind of goes away so that the power comes back on, and you can lower the water level, which renders him motionless for a little bit, and you can just put missile after missile into his weak spot until the water level rises again, and then you just repeat the same process. He does have an attack where he swings one tentacle at you, which you can counter, and another where he lunges 3 of his tentacles at you, which you can dodge by using the grapple beam. It's a pretty simple game plan and you figure it out pretty quickly, so Droigiga isn't really that tough. Number 7 is Corpius. Now Corpius is the first real boss encounter that you find yourself in, especially up to that point your only threat were the 2 EMMIs that you beat before. Corpius is an appropriate first boss fight that can do big damage if you aren't paying attention, and that's because you have little resources. You have like 2 energy tanks at most and probably 20 to 25 missiles, which isn't really much when you're facing off a boss that has 3 phases. When he swings his tail at you, he does it pretty quick, so you have to have good reactions in order to avoid them. Overall, this boss is slightly challenging because you face him so early on. First phase is pretty simple since you can just spam missiles on his face until you get to phase 2. You can spam the power beam on that glowing part of his tail once you get to phase 3. And once you are in phase 3, you do have to do a little bit more dodging, using the spider magnet on the little section that they give you, dodging his tail a little bit more. Once you learn how to dodge his attacks, then you got the fight covered. Number 6 is the robot Chozo soldier. The first time you encounter this mini boss is when he murders Quiet Robe right in front of you. I'm gonna be honest, my first time fighting this, I actually died because I wasn't expecting him to chase you so hard, similar to how an EMMI does. He shoots you with beams that are homing, so you actually have to work a little bit to dodge them, and you have to have good reactions to dodge or counter his charge attacks. There's 2 different ones, so you have to really quickly recognize which one he's going to do, and you have to avoid one and you can counter the other. There is a bit of a rhythm to it which you can catch on pretty quickly, but again I'm going to put them here because on a first playthrough it can kind of catch you off guard. Number 5, the twin robot Chozo soldiers. Did you like one of these things? Well, here's 2. I've separated these 2 since it's technically classified as a different type of boss fight, but I'm just going to put it 1 ahead of it because you're just facing 2 instead of 1. They have the same attacks, you just have to dodge them twice as often, and you don't really have time to counterattack that 1 charge attack that they have, because then the other robot can just hit you. So just dodge the attack and shoot missiles the same way as you do when it's just one of them, and you'll eventually win the fight. I think I died once or twice in these fights as well because again it's 2 of them this time, so just make sure you have enough energy tanks and you should be able to take them out no problem. Number 4, the Chozo soldiers. It was at this point when I was making this countdown where I realized that if the Chozo soldiers are in the 4th spot, all the bosses in this game are really not incredibly hard when you think about it, but the Chozo soldiers are a step up from their robot stepbrothers and Corpius just because they can absolutely melt your energy if you get hit. Their attacks are easy to dodge, but if you do happen to get hit, they do a lot of damage. The first phase is simple enough. You can flash shift over them, but if you get clipped by their spear, then you can end up getting hit once or twice, which again can do a lot of damage. Sometimes you realize you lost like 2 or 3 energy tanks and you just don't know where they went. Even as you get to phase 2, they start using this sludge attack, which again, if you get hit, can really melt your energy, so you have to be very careful and keep an eye on their movements. Later versions of this boss have shields that you need to get rid of with either missiles or a counter sequence before you can start doing real damage. I'm not ashamed to say that I died once or twice on my first playthrough, probably due to a lack of energy tanks and a little bit of trial and error trying to learn patterns. Once you learn how to combat them, they're not that hard at all. But if you're challenging yourself in any type of way, let's say by not getting as many energy tanks as you can or doing a 0% run or something like that, these bosses can be really hard and definitely more difficult than the robot versions and Corpius. Number 3 is Kraid. Now we're finally getting into the challenging and fun boss fights. Thank God that you have the wide beam for this fight, otherwise Kraid would be an absolute nightmare. I've always enjoyed fighting Kraid in each game that he's appeared in, mostly because you start to realize that he would probably be unbeatable if he just kept his mouth shut, but he's so mad at losing to Samus all the time, so he just can't help it. As you start to spam missiles right down his throat, he starts tossing fangs and vomiting flames at you, and whatever that green stuff is. You can just take all of this stuff out with your wide beam, and once you clear the field, you can just keep shooting missiles at him. Once you do enough damage, you'll get into phase 2, where you're pretty much just facing his belly after he destroys the platform. Assuming you didn't sequence break to get the bombs already, all you have to do is shoot this weak spot, which again, you can just spam your wide beam. Once you do enough damage, you can spider magnet back up to his head and shoot missiles at him once more. He does have one counter sequence where he swings his arm at you and then you can just lay missiles into him over and over. And again, the pacing of this fight is pretty good because you have enough resources to beat him, but not enough just to make him overpowered. Unless, again, like I said, you sequence break for the bombs and then you just kill him almost immediately. Eventually, once you do enough damage, you'll beat him for probably not the last time or just until the next Metroid game comes out. Number 2, experiment number Z57. Now this is an awesome boss. It has everything you really want, the perfect balance of fun and challenging, and you're basically required to use pretty much all of the abilities that you've gained up to that point to be able to beat him. You can even use your speed booster for some huge damage or even a finishing blow, although it's not really that easy to pull off. But the flash shift, space jump, and appropriate uses of your storm and super missiles are all necessary to win this fight. There's a counter sequence as well, although you don't really need that in order to beat him. Hitting him is pretty straightforward, but you don't really get too many chances to hit him repeatedly because you're constantly dodging his attacks for kind of like half the fight. So take the counter sequence if you can. Space jump over the swiping attacks, flash shift over the lava that's caused by his lasers, and jump through the shockwaves correctly, and eventually you will beat him. On a first playthrough, he's definitely up there in difficulty. That's why I have him here at number 2. Now, number 1, I think we all saw this coming. Number 1 is obviously Beak. I think we can all agree that Beak is genuinely the only difficult boss in the game. He tests your reflexes with quick strikes, forces you to use multiple abilities to avoid his attacks, and he has a ton of health, so you'll be fighting him for quite a bit. Beak has 3 phases, the first of which you'll be on the ground where he lunges at you, uses massive beams where the only way of avoiding it is getting right next to him, and also has a point during the first phase where you can't even do damage to him. You're going to have to look into counter opportunities to do enough damage to get into phase 2, which is really hard to get a hang of on your first playthrough. Once you realize where all the counter opportunities are, you will eventually get into phase 2 where he takes the fight into the air. You really have to react quickly to dodge his aerial assaults, which luckily you have the flash shift, so that kinda does it for you. And you don't have much time to spam missiles or your plasma beams, so sometimes storm missiles in this phase work a little bit better, and your plasma beam as well. All while dodging a relentless barrage of attacks that you need to be constantly moving to avoid. He also channels his inner Goku and uses a Kamehameha wave, which you can either jump over or flash shift, and then you can hit him for a second or two. I find this second wave to be the longest, but eventually you will get to phase 3, which is similar to phase 1, with a couple of added attacks. He'll start using shine sparks to lunge at you, which admittedly are pretty hard to dodge, and also a giant spirit bomb which you can destroy with power bombs, and it gives you some much needed resources. All of his attacks are pretty much the same as the first phase, along with the giant laser from phase 2, but you need to be diligent about dodging his attacks or you will lose. It ends with a super cool cutscene where Samus unlocks her Metroid abilities and then gives Beak an eye exam. Then he gets infected by an X, which makes him huge, but you can use your Mega Laser at that point, and then you've beaten the game. And that's pretty much it, guys. The Metroid Dread bosses ranked from easiest to hardest. Again, I was trying to do it in a viewpoint of a first playthrough, since if you have a lot of experience with the game, the bosses obviously become very easy. After doing multiple playthroughs, I actually don't think the bosses in this game are that hard. Other than Beak, he can still be pretty difficult, but on the first playthrough, I think this is a pretty solid list. So tell me what you guys think in the comments. Is this a good list? Would you change the order? What are your opinions? Go ahead and discuss. If you enjoyed the video, go ahead and like and subscribe if you want, and I will see you guys next time. Peace.